With just days left until the election, all eyes are on the youth vote. Since 2000, the Harvard Public Opinion Project has conducted the nation's longest-running and most rigorous survey on the political attitudes of young Americans aged 18 to 29. Here are what the results of the 49th Harvard Youth Poll have to say about what's at stake for young voters in this election.
Our latest poll finds high levels of voting intention and enthusiasm for this election.
A consolidation of support around Kamala Harris.
A widening gap between young men and young women.
And extensive doubt about whether a peaceful transition of power will occur.
This November, young voters across the country are positioned to make a critical difference in the outcome of U.S. elections.
But before we dig into the details, here's how we got here. It wasn't always like this. In the 2000 presidential election, for example, young voters were divided almost evenly between George W. Bush and Al Gore, and turnout was quite low.
Today, the picture couldn't be more different. Young voters turned out in record numbers for the 2018 midterms and the 2020 presidential election, and the 2022 midterms weren't far behind.
In an election that came down to a couple thousand votes in a handful of swing states, young voters carried President Biden to his 2020 victory.
A majority of those under 30 turned out to vote, favoring Biden over former President Trump by 24 percentage points.
And we know that Trump won voters over the age of 45 in 2020.
Our latest poll found that 57% of young Americans say they will definitely be voting in the upcoming election. 4 years ago, 60% said they would in our poll. Ultimately, in the 2020 election, 53% of young Americans turned out to vote.
Today, young people are also largely aligning themselves with Vice President Kamala Harris. Our new poll finds that in a five-way matchup among young registered voters, 53% say that they will be voting for Harris, and 33% say they're going to be voting for Trump.
And when we look at just those who say they'll definitely be voting, Harris captures 60%.
But who are these voters anyway? And what do they care about?
This fall, we found that economic concerns rank top of mind for young voters.
And a third of them say that this is their top issue.
Abortion, immigration, and the environment also ranked high.
Gen Z grew up during the 2008 housing bust and recession, and today, as adults, they're experiencing a surge in housing prices. In 2023, we found that 1 in 3 young Americans were concerned that they personally could become homeless one day.
From gun violence to the cost of living, young Americans are looking towards their government to solve these important issues. Over the past decade, voters aged 18 to 29 have grown more supportive of having their government provide basic health insurance, play a more active role in curbing climate change, and spend more to reduce poverty.
Policy-wise, majorities of young Americans support caps on prescription drug prices and legalizing abortion in most cases, while Gen Z overwhelmingly rejects Project 2025.
Young Americans report record low trust in many public institutions, including the Supreme Court, military, and Congress. So there's a big gap in what young Americans want out of their government and what they feel like they're getting out of it.
For many, the future of American democracy is also at stake. Only 20% of young Americans are confident that there will be a peaceful transition of power, regardless of who wins the election.
So where do the candidates stack up on the issues? Young people say they trust Harris to handle most issues, but she performs best on climate change, abortion, and education.
On the other hand, Harris is still neck and neck with Trump on the economy, immigration, and national security. However, just looking at likely voters, Harris wins on every issue surveyed, including the economy.
Harris has expanded on Biden's lead with young voters in the spring.
But both campaigns have made inroads with Gen Z. From high-profile podcast appearances to viral TikTok content, Harris and Trump have recognized the importance of reaching young voters.
So what are young Americans looking for in a president? We asked them to consider 7 different qualities and report which one they valued most in a president.
Young Americans say their top quality among these 7 is competence, which a majority of young voters associate with Harris. 29% of young voters say Trump is more competent. Young Americans are more likely to view Harris as strong, empathetic, and honest.
Trump performed marginally better on patriotism and sense of humor among all young Americans, but for registered and likely voters, Harris took the lead on these attributes.
Compared to where Biden was this spring, Harris has made large gains with young men and young women. At the same time, Trump has chipped away at Democrats' margins with young men relative to 4 years ago.
Looking at young registered voters, Harris captures 48% of young men to Trump's 38%. In fall 2020, our poll found Biden winning young registered men 50% to Trump's 31%.
Young Black and young Hispanic voters support Harris by wide margins in this poll, but it remains unclear whether they will turn out for her to the same extent that they did for Biden in 2020.
And those are some of the results from the latest edition of the Harvard Youth Poll. For more information, go to iop.harvard.edu.